Hello, life-changing friends. Today I'm going to talk about my thoughts on a complete classic, which, despite being a classic, very few people have read. Or maybe that's not that unusual. But what it's going to be, as you can tell from the title, is the book called Psychological Types, written by Carl Jung in the first years of the 20th century. And if you know anything about psychological typing, you will know that before he wrote it, there were some psychological types that people went around classifying people with, which were, there was one that was based on the humours from classical times, and there was also one which was quite trendy, which was about the kind of bumps on your head. And there was somebody else who thought that they could tell everything about your moral character by what your face looked like. So, and that was about as sophisticated as it got before I'm not an expert, so this is just as far as I know. Please correct me in the comments if you have, well, no doubt there will be people with much better information on this stuff. But anyway, so Carl Jung, when he wrote this, he had been practicing as a psychotherapist for many years, and had developed some ideas of his own about what went on in people's heads. And he had a classification which started with introvert and extrovert, and then developed from there with that there were kind of two other dimensions that he reckoned explained a lot of how people's minds worked. And he didn't develop his ideas by experimentation. He did them by observation, and then came up with this hypothetical framework that could then be tested, which is what scientists do in any new field, right? Is that they see what they notice, what they see, they record what they see, and then they come up with a hypothetical reason for that. And later people do the testing, right? So, and the power of his hypothesis is, the influence of it has been great since he did this. Okay. So, what I'm going to quickly do is just, rather than going through the whole thing, I'm just going to go to my scorecard, which I will give you the whole of at the end of this video, and talk through what I think about this book. Because it's a purely theoretical discussion of his ideas about psychological typing. Okay. So first of all is the woo-woometer, right? So how woo-woo is this book and the ideas in it? And initially reading it, I thought, actually, this isn't in any way woo-woo, because it's simply him saying, this is what I noticed, this is what I think about that, where it comes from, and that you can divide human beings into people who are more likely to make judgments on the basis of logic, and people who are more likely to make judgments on the basis of values, for example, right? Which doesn't sound at all woo-woo. But then quite early on in the book, he starts talking about why he thinks we are differentiated in that way, right? Between people who, because from his point of view, he thinks that we all start off undifferentiated in the sense that we have the potential to, as babies, to use all the functions of our mind, whenever relevant, and that we are differentiated from each other when we as children start preferring one type of decision making over the other, for example, and then we have an imbalance, as it were, which creates our different personalities from each other, right? And that sounds kind of okay. You can think of a physical analogy to that quite easily, like if you have a tree that it has a prevailing wind as it grows, then it's going to grow in one particular direction, whereas at the beginning it had the potential to grow in any direction, right? So far so good. But then he goes on to say something like, okay, don't quote me on this, right? He goes on to say something like that undifferentiated potential is actually a universal unconscious thing that we all are not attached to exactly, but we are all come from, we all are. And as you can tell, I'm sitting here trying to explain what it is, but failing because I don't understand it. Okay, I don't understand what he intended by it, and I really don't want to say the wrong thing because if you're interested in that stuff, please go ahead and read the book. But actually, if you're interested in that stuff, this isn't the book to start with, right? Go and find another Carl Jung book, maybe the Red Book, maybe a collection of Carl Jung ideas, because this book is specifically about psychological types. So the reason I've put 7 out of 10 on my woo-ometer is because although almost all of the book is completely understandable in normal, rational terms, there is this thing that is not, right? Which is obviously, he thinks it's underlying the whole thing and is the path to freedom for us as human beings. And he obviously, it's fundamental, right? Okay, the next thing is lineage, right? So when I say lineage on the end sheet for this, what I mean is, where do the ideas come from? Because almost all books, if you look into the context, the ideas are ideas that are around anyway, and they're just being kind of translated by the author of the book. And I've got to say, I think this guy really was a bit of a genius. And there is no direct lineage. He made it all up himself. Okay, so I can see some influence, the idea of unconscious stuff. He worked with Freud, and so that's come from there, and from Mesmer, the hypnosis guy. So there's that, and then there's some ideas. He was a student of Eastern philosophy, and there are some ideas that seem to be derived a little bit from that, although who knows. And but the fundamental set of ideas that he had about personality types, people say that they came from humans because there are 4 of them, right? But actually, it's not a direct correlation. You can't lay them on top of each other in the way that you might expect. Right? So there you go. There's my definition of a genius: is that there's something really central to this book, which is entirely unique and invented by the guy, right? Okay, and it hangs together beautifully. It does, and he's not saying it explains everything. Is another thing which is quite interesting. Okay, so next section is profundity, right? So this isn't an objective measure. I'm not sure how you could objectively measure profundity, but I'm using a body of water, the size of a body of water and the depth of it, as a metaphor for how profound I think the ideas in this book are, right? So, and the range that I have is between a puddle, which is obviously something that has no depth whatsoever, through, rivers, lakes, blah, 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 all the way down to the Marianas Trench, right? That would be the most profound thing that I had ever read, okay? And this one is profound enough to be an ocean, right? A smallish ocean, because personality types is like, how important is that in the whole sphere of human, of the universe, whatever. So it's a small ocean. So I'm going to call it the Indian Ocean, for example. And so it's small because it's a rather narrow subject, but it's very deep because this is a metamodel, right? So what's a metamodel? A metamodel is a model of models. So in the context of personality typing, it's saying, one person looks at the world and at themselves and sees it in a particular way. Sorry, my light keeps going off. So that would be a model. So my model of the world is such and such. If you look at all the people and look at all their different models and make a model about those, that is a metamodel. And in my world, that means it's automatically more profound, right? Because it has the capacity to explain so much more of people, you know, of how we behave. Okay, so there we are. So we have an Indian Ocean. Readability. This is a bit of a problem with this book, is that there are parts of it, especially the first few chapters, which are his analysis of other philosophers' thinking and how their thinking can tell you about how their minds work, right? That's quite readable. That's kind of on the medium readability scale, which maybe I'll go into it another time. But then there's the second section, the second part of the book, which is it is his model, his explanation of what he means by his terms, and how he, in his own mind, explains those things, those differences between people to himself. It's really hard work. It's really hard work. And I think the reason for that is twofold. One is that he has created new definitions of words, which he knows incredibly well, so well that there are things he doesn't feel he has to explain. And secondly, that he was writing a long, long time ago. So his sentence structure and his way of expressing himself is really old-fashioned, and to the extent that it's quite difficult to understand what he's trying to say sometimes. Right, so I'm afraid to say that if I wasn't a huge psycho head, a huge psych head who had to read this because I was giving a talk on it, I would not have finished it. I would not have finished it. And so on the readability scale, I have given him James Joyce. Right? So, okay, there are two more sections in this chart, in this scoreboard. One is the life-changing index. Is it true? Is it relevant? Is it applicable? And I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's like 70 to 90% true. It may or may not be useful. But because it's so dense and complicated, and you have to get your whole head round something that it isn't created to get around, it's really difficult to apply it. Right. People have tried, which I may go into another day with another book at some point, but not now. So who's it for? Total psych heads only. Total psych heads only. Don't bother if you're kind of motivated. If you're kind of motivated to find out about Jung's personality types, go for somebody's analysis of it rather than the original, is my advice. They won't get it right all the time, but it'll be a lot easier to read. Okay, so finally, The total analysis is it shelve, donate, or bin? And for me, it's a shelve. Because I am a total psykhead, in case you hadn't already noticed. So thank you for listening. Keep reading and see you soon.